So without further ado, I'm just going to launch into it. The vexed question of how to present research has baffled academics from time immemorial. It wouldn't be surprising if I'm not able to illuminate it much in this short presentation. I've only been given 20 minutes. That means I really have to rush because it's not really enough time to say everything that has to be said. I probably would have made a better job of it if my cousin, well, actually he's my second cousin, hadn't gotten sick in Ontario because I've been quite worried about him. And I haven't been able to concentrate for the last couple of days, but here goes anyway. First, I'd like to thank Jenny Horn for inviting me to make this presentation, and all the staff of the Research and Scholarly Activity Office for the support they've given me along the way. Rasheen fixed the garbled wording of the website announcement of the talk. Liz Hammond-Karina has always been very supportive. Catherine has come today to help me out, set up the equipment and so on, and of course my mother, father and sister have always helped me in my academic career. And let's face it, that support was necessary. It's been a huge amount of work to pull this presentation together. In doing so, I read 37 articles in professional journals, 4 books, and a full-length article on Wikipedia. It took me 2 months of intense qualitative research in jumping Java, and I had to pull 2 all-nighters before I was ready to stand before you today, but here I am, so let's see. I think I have to leave, I have to leave the next part out. Okay, here we go then. According to Puncher and Wapner, 1952, there are 7 basic modes of presentation. The oral, the modified oral, the enhanced oral, the visual, the audiovisual, the modified audiovisual, and the enhanced audiovisual. Fartoff and Belcher in 1967 pointed out that through various combinations of permutations of these basic types, one can produce at least 42 varieties, such as the enhanced oral stroke modified audiovisual or the visual stroke modified oral, each with its own peculiar formal characteristics. In 1975, Testu and Cunard introduced a cross-cutting taxonomy based on the rhetorical and/or perlocutionary force of the most prominent elements of the presentational approach: the serious, the comic, the serio-comic, the humorous, the mildly amusing, the exhortational, the polemical, the sermonizing, the vituperative, the demagogic, and finally the satirical. These 11 categories can be combined and permutated in 110 ways, which, when we factor in the 42 formal categories identified by Puncher and Wapner and Fartoff and Belcher, result in a total of 4,620 types of presentation. This explains, of course, why my research took so much work, and why only a brain as advanced as mine could have contemplated taking it on in the first place. My contention, and the central finding of my research into presentation format, is... Oh, I see nobody's taking notes. I've lost you already, I can tell. So I'm here really to talk... Oops. That's the kind of thing that one doesn't want to happen. Okay. I just have to back up. I pressed that button once, and it just went ding. Okay. Let's hope it goes slowly this time. So I'm asking your forgiveness for that ridiculous performance, and hoping you can help me come to some conclusions about the various mistakes, deliberate mistakes I hasten to add that I made during that period. So let's just look at some of the ones that I think I'd want to isolate myself. 1, don't read your presentation. It's my eyes are down, I made no contact with anyone in the room during that time period. I was just looking at what I was reading, right? So I forgot that the presentation is a form of communication, not display. Definitely don't talk about how much work it took to produce it. The whole point of presenting your research is to make it seem as effortless as possible. Don't apologize or make excuses for its inadequacy. If it is inadequate, people will be quite aware of it. And if it's not, they will give you credit for it. Don't engage in personal anecdote unrelated to that topic or that rubbish about my cousin. Don't thank anyone not directly involved. A closing acknowledgement to the project supervisor is okay. So it is all right to grant some credit if you had some help in preparing, if you're working on your research and preparing, but do it at the end, not the beginning, I would say, and also minimize it as much as possible. And if you happen to make a change on the fly, suppose you have been assigned a certain amount of time and you don't, you find yourself getting a bit behind the clock, you're a bit worried that you may not get to present your overall conclusions. Sometimes it's okay to leave out some detail. People, if they feel there's a gap, will ask a question in the question period and you can fill the gap that way. But don't, just do it smoothly. Just don't say, oh, I have to leave this out. Nothing's so frustrating to an audience as learning that they're not getting the whole truth, or the whole picture. But they will ask if they feel they want to know more. Some more don'ts. Don't overburden the audience with too elaborate an account of the research context. So you will have to, there's never enough time to explain everything that you want to include in your presentation. You will have to set up to some extent what the context is, what literature, what's in the literature or in other people's previous research that sets the stage for the particular contribution that you're making. But you have to do that quickly, briefly, and very much to the point, not a whole long list of going back. I think mine went back more than 50 years, so probably unnecessary to speak to the more contemporary context. Don't introduce too many technical terms without giving a brief explanation of their meaning. And the brief is important. Maybe it should have been bolded. Research is conducted in and expressed in technical terms, and you have to judge the caliber of your audience and their exposure to the kinds of words that you would be using. Obviously, you may find that they're all familiar, but in that thing I used quite a few that I doubt many people will be familiar with. Your goal is to explain, not to baffle or confuse, so that's very important. Don't pretend to be, but I have difficulty doing that. There you go. Don't let yourself appear flustered, because that undermines the confidence that your audience would have in what you're saying. You may feel nervous. In fact, I was a bit nervous about doing that. There was a little bit of mistakes with that, but you might not realise. So it's easy for me to get flustered, or certainly to appear so. Don't avoid eye contact with the audience. I mentioned that earlier as well. It's very important. And lastly, don't turn your back on the audience and read the PowerPoint screen. So there's a whole other range of deliberate mistakes that I just committed. Why occasionally I looked over my shoulder at you just to check that you were, to add some content. But I use PowerPoint in the most boring way imaginable. First of all, by reading what it says on the screen. I think you all have eyes, you all can read the screen. And you didn't need me to merely be repeating it. So it's good to have visual aids often. Some learners really appreciate having things laid out in a visual way. And a quick summary of what you're saying can be helpful to people. But in my view, I've just seen so many presentations where the presenter is oriented the wrong way towards the display mechanism and not towards the people that they're supposed to be talking to and communicating with. So what would be, there's some don'ts. Before we go any further, did you have any other comments on, or even how I'm presenting right now? Yeah. So, what's your name, by the way?
Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
Like speaking too fast, went
quite
fast through a bit of it there. And
yeah.
Just kind of lose interest in
That's right. Yeah. You probably have made presentations before of one kind and other in classes and things. Reflect back on some of that experience, and certainly I know that I've made presentations in which I spoke too fast. It's a reaction to nervousness, It's wanting to get all of your, there's this big stuff that you're trying to get into a small amount of time. You try and push it in, but it's counterproductive, as you say. You just don't. When that words come like that, just in a sort of torrent, no one's able to pick out what you're saying. And even perhaps I was flicking through those don'ts too fast as well. Any other comments or thoughts? Be critical, I can take it. In fact, the more criticism, the more effective my presentation was.
Hi, my name's Fiona.
Hi, Fiona.
The ums sometimes can be a problem for many people.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Absolutely right. And that's difficult to control. Yeah, because I wasn't controlling. That's interesting. I used to be a radio presenter, and at that time in my life, I had the ums utterly under control. But thank you for pointing that out. That wasn't a deliberate mistake. That was just things have changed. Nice one. Anything else that comes to mind? Yeah. We'll go on. If I didn't make specific, well, identify some mistakes I made, what other kind of mistake do you think would be easy? Have you noticed other people making, or perhaps have you noticed that? Yes.
Body language, your hands in your pockets.
Yeah.
And you're kind of moving around a bit at the beginning.
Yeah. Would you find what I was saying more authoritative if I stayed still? If I sat down?
Yeah, it's just distracting.
Yeah,
if you're playing with something, right?
Yeah, playing with the keys. Yeah. Good, excellent. Good one. Have you noticed other, what in other presentations that you've experienced, not necessarily this one, have you found difficult in the past?
Talking too quiet so that you can hear it.
Right, yeah. That requires practice, doesn't it, I think? I've always recommended that people, you have to kind of judge the room, because you can also talk too loud and project too much. So this is a fairly quiet room, a very small room, but it's also acoustically quite good. It doesn't muffle people's voices, but yeah.
There's one I struggle with, is monotone.
Monotone, yeah.
Just deliver everything.
Yeah. And again, it's a reaction again to nervousness, that I think. And it sometimes sounds a bit silly if you deliberately try to avoid monotone. But again, it's a question, if you, I always recommend that people practice in advance, right? Get a couple of friends together, or family, whatever it is, or if you're a group of students who know each other working on a project or working on separate projects but you're going to be presenting at the same time, then get together in a group and present to each other, so you can practice those. And then also it becomes a bit more familiar, you get routine doing it. So that's another one, tail off, where you begin saying something and then towards the end of saying it, you just sort of another difficult one. We're going to make some suggestions, perhaps, about what improvements can be made. I'm really, really interested in ideas that you have about that as well, because hopefully you can formulate and express your ideas. You can also go forward and apply them. And I suppose this is my theoretical assumption behind the ideas I'm going to lay before you, that learning is dialogical. So what do I mean by dialogical? It's essentially consists in dialogue. So we have different models of learning that operate in a university. And I'm not saying my model is, this model is correct or is superior to any other model, but it's one that I think is more applicable than any other model. So your goal in the presentation is not, from my point of view, is not to communicate a little bundle of information from one brain to another brain. That's sort of, it's one view, right, of, what's the joke? That post-secondary education is the professor's notes being relayed from the professor to the student, to becoming the student's notes without either of them understanding what's being said. Right? So, so that's sort of the worst possible satirical description of what can happen in post-secondary education when it's just information transfer. But information transfer, if it doesn't happen with understanding, is useless, right? So obviously what's being transferred has to be understood. The way to do that, it seems to me, is dialogue. So it's always back and forth, question and answer, back and forth. And that's the principle that I've always put into my practice. I haven't introduced myself yet, but I'm currently the Dean of Social Sciences, but in my previous life, that's just a recent thing, a year and a half ago, I taught in the Liberal Studies Department. That's basically what I did for 20 years, and philosophy also. And in the practice that we employ in our classes in liberal studies is roundtable discussion. There's a little bit of an opportunity for professors to lecture briefly once a week, and then it's team taught, so you don't even get to lecture every week, so every 2 or 3 weeks. And but the main learning happens when students and instructors sit down together with some material that they've read or been exposed to. It might be listening to music, or it might be looking at art, or it might be reading a book, and sharing their responses to that and trying to achieve sort of a critical understanding of that material, whatever it is. But working on all of their own different reactions and comparing them and contrasting them and putting them together into an overall picture. So it's that conversation, that dialogue between people, that for me is always formed the basis of education. So I kind of like, when I think about presentations, I kind of like thinking about some way to cast them with a question and answer format. This is only one. Well, I'll mention a couple of models, but it's one kind of model. It's not the only possible one, but you want to engage your audience in a certain way, not just say out the things that you have to say, but provoke them. First of all, you want them to be following, understanding what you're saying, but provoke them to respond in order to deepen that understanding. It's actually a two-way process. I mean, you have to convey your stuff. You want other people to understand it. But you will understand your own stuff better if you listen to the responses of other people, right? And so the whole presentation should always have a question and answer session as part of it, and maybe in the middle of it, as we had a brief one just then. And it should aim towards that. Like you don't feel that you have to say everything in the presentation. Use the presentation to spark people's thinking about what you've done in your work, in your research, or whatever the activity is, and to provoke them into asking you questions which can take that further, so you get that to and fro. And nothing so nice as having a presentation in which, by the 2 minutes after it's finished and the question and answer is happening, people are talking to each other across the room about things. And in fact, the presenter can just step back. And okay, it's happening, it's going. Personal anecdote. Maybe you don't need too many personal anecdotes in a presentation, but I can do one anyway. When I interviewed for a job here, there were like about 10 people on the interview committee. This was like in the 1990s, a long time ago. And the first time I came in. And I got the job. But at some point in the interview, I became a slightly irrelevant figure. Like I was responding to a question. We had this discussion, and then one of the people in the committee didn't sort of agree with an assumption behind the question that somebody else had asked. So they started a conversation, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting there thinking, interesting. I'm being interviewed. These two are having kind of an argument. I don't really know. emotional argument, but they were sort of debating some particular point. So it was really, really good because I let them go for about 5 minutes and I said, excuse me, can I contribute to this debate, please, this comment? And I had a good length of time to figure out what I wanted to say about it. So it's good. So presentation should be provoking discussion, in other words. And I'll give you an example of what made me think about this, and what I think is a really good example. And you could even listen to this. On CBC, there's a radio show. It's around Saturday lunchtime. I'm not exactly sure the precise hours. It's called Quirks and Quarks, or Quirks and Quarks, they say, but there's a dispute about how you pronounce that second word. And it's basically science radio, right? Science journalists. So they invite scientists onto the show to discuss their work. So they're presenting the results of their research. And the way that those interviews work is so effective. They've got a couple of formulas that they use, and I've just, in listening to them myself, I've found them to be really, really good. It's all based now. It's a bit artificial, and it's not necessarily something you can do in your presentations. But I'll get to that part later. We may be able to find some analog that would be valuable. So what they do is based on a lot of preparation. So before that interview even happens, that particular scientist who's coming on to present has been interviewed by somebody else, a reporter for that program, or a story producer for that program, what they call the pre-interview. And so they've figured out more or less a script for the way the interview is going to go. Now, qualification, sometimes it can be, at the worst of times, a bit artificial, because you can hear that the person who's answering the questions, the scientist, is actually reading the answers. And that's not good. It sounds artificial, it's not very engrossing or absorbing for the audience. It sounds like it's set up. But when they do it more naturally, in other words, when the scientist knows in advance what the order of the questions is going to be, but doesn't write down the answers, is going to respond kind of verbally or orally to those things, but knows more or less in advance what they're going to say in response to each question. It's very, very effective. It's clear, it goes really smoothly. So if you ever, maybe, well, it's not March 27th yet, there'll be a couple of shows of this. If you have a chance to listen to that show, I would recommend it. And all based on that same principle, it's questions and answers. So you want to then, I'm thinking, okay, is there a way that we could set up a presentation so that it provokes questions in the mind of the audience, and then you're going to answer those questions, and in two ways. In one, so the first way is, as the presenter is speaking, as I'm speaking to you now, are questions popping up in people's minds, which they're not actually going to verbalize to me, but in 3 minutes' time, I'm going to be giving the answer to that question. Right? So you sort of set little mysteries in the way that you're developing your material. Right? A little something that's to be explained later. People say, no, wait a minute. About that. And then there's kind of a nice sense of a fulfilled satisfaction through a fulfilled expectation when you actually come to the answer of that thing later. Or more explicitly, you're aiming at that question and answer period at the end when people will verbalize their questions and you can respond to them now. So one way to do one way to mimic, if you like, or to find an analog to the Quirks and Quarks approach is actually to be interviewed by a fellow student. I mean, it would be possible to arrange a presentation that way if you wanted to, right? A friend, you say a friend to ask you questions and you respond to the questions. So therefore, then the interviewer, the friend, if you like, a colleague, is acting as a proxy for the audience, of asking the kinds of questions that you have agreed between you would naturally come up in the mind of the audience. So it's one possible way to do it. I'm just throwing out ideas. Or you could interview yourself, right, if you didn't want to do it with a colleague. So again, you could structure your presentation in such a way that you're going to ask yourself a question out loud to the audience, and then answer that question. So instead of just sort of starting and going through material that you have to present, as I did very poorly in the beginning, you say, okay, the questions, you just introduce the whole thing. The questions I'm going to answer in this interview are the following, and then mention sort of the beginning what did I do for my research, what was the purpose of that research, what conclusion did I reach. And then as you're going through that as well, you can ask subsidiary questions. All right, so, given what happened in that first experiment or that first study, why did I then redesign the study for the second part of the experiment? Or what was the point of that, or the survey, whatever it was? So ask yourself the question and then answer the question. Or you can use PowerPoint as the interviewer. That's one possibility. It's one sensitive way, different way, let's say, to use PowerPoint than just having... I'm still really using the old way, because I'm trying not to put my back to the screen. Tempting. But I have a little screen down here that I can look at as well. Just to make sure that I'm at the same point as what the screen is at. So you could use the screen as formulating the questions which you're then going to answer, and then you don't even have to say the question necessarily. I've already spoken about interactivity and engaging the audience that way. That's the point of it, right? It's to get people thinking about what you're saying. And they're going to be thinking if they're actively engaged in. Does that make sense, actually? Does it make sense? Maybe it doesn't. Anyone think it doesn't make sense? Let's talk about that. Because it maybe doesn't. Is it? Some audiences, don't want to talk. I've seen this happen 100 times. Old people, actually, they never want to talk back. They're too traditional. I'm an old person now. But when I was young, I used to go to events or lectures, and there would never be any questions, but people would be so appreciative when the professor or whoever it was gave out the speech, a political figure, whoever. And then, you listen to the comments as they're leaving, and oh, that was so interesting, wasn't it? It was really great, so interesting. And a good speaker can do that, can, inspire a person. It's absolutely true. But still, we wonder how much did the people, after being impressed, how much did they actually take away from that, whatever the presentation or lecture was. They always say it's interesting, it's interesting. So interest is a certain kind of level of engagement, but it's not really all that deep yet. And so I always think, some back and forth is that's where the learning mind comes into activity, it seems to. But I stand to be corrected, or you can disagree if you wish. I guess I'm summarising with this list, really, what I've been talking about and hoping to convince you of. So, we're definitely getting more now to the list of things that will be important, and I'm getting down to a level of detail. So far I've been talking more generally about overall approach in designing a presentation, but you also need to look at the level of detail. Sorry, what I mean is detailed design of the presentation that you're going to make. You will not be able to, no matter how much or how little time you're given to make a presentation. The SLAM event is going to be fascinating. It's going to be a bit Catherine was talking about earlier, where you have 2 to 3 minutes to present the whole. Yeah, impossible. but not impossible. You're going to have to sift out, right? Obviously, what's the general, what's the outline. what are the most important things, and all of the detail lies behind that, but you cannot communicate all of that detail in the time allowed. It's I have defended theses twice in my life as a student, right? MA thesis and a PhD thesis, and I've witnessed lots of other people doing that, my student colleagues at the time, and almost to a person, they have kind of 40 minutes, let's say, to explain what the content of the thesis is, and then sometimes it's discussed by this committee, right? Thesis defense is sort of the most threatening kind of research presentation you will ever encounter. And there's this panel of people, some of whom you know, some of whom you don't know. They're your examiners, and they're going to decide whether you get your PhD or not. So it all comes down to this last moment. You've worked on it for God knows how many years. It's how many tens of thousands of words long, and now you're presenting it before these people. And they say, well, perhaps you'd like to begin with just a summary of what you've done. And you have half an hour, you have 40, whatever, they give you a length of time. And in every case, and in both of my cases as well, I start, and other people, they started at such a level of detail that they got through perhaps 10% of the thesis, the introduction, and a little bit into the first chapter, and then the chair of the committee says, well, yes, Mr. Black, well, we seem to be running out of time, so perhaps you'd like to draw the, and then you quickly jump to the end, miss out all of the interesting parts in the middle, and quickly give the conclusion. And they say, well, they've all read it, thank goodness, because that's the only way you could get your degree. So you have to plan in advance to avoid that temptation, right? So don't just start. So lay out, divide your presentation into headings, chunk it. It's always the way to do these kinds of things. And you may use kind of reminders for yourself. I always think a good thing to do is to have a little series of flashcards or something like that. Here's the interesting thing about presentations. If you write, maybe tell me if you've experienced any of this. I wrote this in quite large script. And since I was restricting myself to merely reading it at the time when I was presenting it, I wasn't able to do that without a problem. But when I was a beginning lecturer, doing it at sort of 12-point, average kind of size, and especially if you're using them as notes, which are then going, spark you into some more elaboration. So you've got a little note about something. You will find that your eyes are not able to extract, if you're nervous especially, not able to extract the information from the page. You're not able to read it. It's really bizarre. Have you ever had that happen? It's a very bizarre feeling. Because we all know how to read, right? But it goes blurry, and you've forgotten where on the page it is, so if you can mostly internalize everything you want to say, and know your stuff so well that you have it in here. But to remind you, in case you get lost, a series of flashcards. So what I'm going to say at the intro, it's always a really good idea to let people know where you're going to end up and start at the beginning. The conclusion I'm going to reach is, or conclusion of my research is this. This is the hypothesis I was testing, or not sure what kind of research you're doing, but we could talk about that later. And here's what I think the evidence I gathered suggests, I'm thinking of empirical research. You might be presenting as a project in a more critical discipline, in which case, but you say what your thesis is. And then the mystery perhaps is how you got there and how the evidence supports that conclusion. But let people know what the conclusion, don't keep it secret till the end, because they won't then find it easy to follow the route that you got to get there. It's better to know where you're going, then you can understand the route. And flashcards can be a really helpful tool in keeping you on track. You have to move on to the next card every 2 minutes or whatever. And it just gives you the single thing that you want to say. So yes, nothing wrong with identifying briefly, as we mentioned before, the context of the research. The question that you're trying to answer, or the thesis you're aiming at. And also give some kind of idea about the importance of that question. Academic research in these days usually deals with fairly narrow, any particular piece of research usually deals with a fairly narrow question. In liberal studies, we often got students who wanted to write, they have a senior project, like a long essay. It's not an empirically based research, but it's critical analysis of text. And many people would want to answer questions like, what is the role of women in Western civilization from the ancient Greeks up to the present day? So, okay, so you can you imagine the size of the library that will be needed to contain a decent answer to that question? So we always have to know, well, how about we talk about the representation of women in, this book and that book, or these 3 books, or something like that, something a bit more reasonable. But they're narrow in scope, and in other words, typical research projects undertaken in the academy today are narrow in scope. They have to be, because we're at a level of detail. But therefore, to understand that, you also want to know a little bit about why it's important to look at that particular question, what the further implications are of the answer to that question that you've reached. That really helps audiences, I think. Does that make sense? I'm thinking of examples of it often. Likewise, know in your head what you're going to say. Don't leave it till the last day to decide that question. Practice makes perfect, I would say, a true one. And really, really good. You get lots of confidence and support by working with with colleagues, other students in the same course or the same lab or whatever it is that you can work with. Don't be shy of what you're going to say. Get together with them. Discuss any nervousnesses or any other obstacles that you feel might get in the way if you're doing a good presentation. Practice with each other, practice with your family. Make the dog sit there and listen. Do it, whoever. Just do it in advance and do it several times. And you'll just find it's easy. It's like anything, playing if you're going to sing a song, play the guitar, play the piano or something, it's good to practice before you actually go into it. Oh, this is a good one now. Okay, hang on a sec. Do we have speakers, I wonder?
No, just, there you go.
Okay, it wasn't very loud, was it? Never mind. Sorry. That's just a bit of a pause for me. Oh, no, I've got to press this button. I love the technology thing, because I'm going to talk to you about that. Let's talk about that. Now it's got blocked, isn't it? Go away from that. Oh, it's okay. Thanks. There we go. Okay, that's kind of technology. It does give me one more thing to say. Know the technology. I don't know this thing. It's the first time I met it. And so that wasn't, again, a deliberate mistake, but it was a mistake. I should have come in. Catherine did give me a quick lesson, and I just confused 2 of the buttons. It can really, really knock you off kilter if you're not comfortable with technology. I've seen this happen 100 times. I've just experienced it myself. It's wonderful, and it's great. It's great that this can happen. The worst thing is the setup at the very beginning. You come in 2 minutes before your presentation, and then you spend like 10 minutes trying to make sure that the computer is actually communicating with the data projector and that the button works and so again, practice in advance. And it's a mistake I made. I didn't do that. I mean, practice on similar machines in advance, but not this one. Okay, I'm going to sit down now. That's the other thing We were talking before about that question. Should a presenter stand up or sit down? What do you think?
I think you should stand up
Yeah?
and kind of not stay in one spot, but
Mm-hmm.
move occasionally,
Right.
but
Not jump around.
not just like stand there at
Yeah.
one spot and just speak. I mean, you can
Yeah.
in some cases, but I'd say in a situation like this, you want to move around a little bit
Right.
more.
I'm guessing that you would like sort of a smooth movement around, deliberate, rather than jump. I'm a very jumpy kind of guy.
No.
It's just, I can't do anything about that. I can't do anything about that. So I hop around all the time, and wave my arms. But body language can be valuable too, yeah, in that sense of it's controlled movement. So it's the techniques of trying to represent yourself as a reliable source of information in a way. That the more deliberate you are about in your gestures, in your movements, then it kind of breeds kind of comfort and a trust, right? So, interesting point. Tell me about the presentations that you'll be making. Right? What are you planning to do in the next little while?
I've been asked to present a paper at a conference, but I've been recommended or basically told just to read it.
Right, okay.
So I've been thinking of ways of trying to gussy it up. So because I went to another conference in Victoria, and that's what students did. They read their papers.
How did you find that as an audience member?
I didn't really care for it, but if that's what they were told to do, then
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a couple of them had PowerPoints that just with images,
Uh-huh.
and that was helpful.
Yeah.
And then the Q&A was good because it made for some discussion.
Right.
But one presenter, he just stood there with his paper and just read it.
Yeah.
And it was also really, it was full of a lot of jargon, which didn't help.
Yeah, that's right. It's very difficult to, I mean, no matter how smart you are and how well you know the subject, it's very hard, even for, and I'm amazed at the number of presentations that go that way at conferences. These, there's technical people, there's people, practitioners in the field, very highly gifted ones in many cases, both presenting and being in the audience. And you could just read that paper. The paper might be published in the proceedings of the conference, and then you read it, and then you get something out of it, right? Because you can go back and pause and think. But at the rate at which it's delivered, in an oral situation where you don't have the words in front of you as well, it's so impossible to...
Yeah, I've been given 12 minutes, so I don't really know what I'm going to do other than read it, but I would like to have the opportunity to perhaps pause and elaborate on specific points.
Right.
Take lines off the paper and make eye contact and that sort of thing. But
is your paper already written?
Yeah.
How long is it? How many pages is it? 9?
I think 2,000 words.
Okay. When we were in radio, our rule of thumb was that to read a page of double-spaced writing, typing, takes 2 minutes. So if 9 pages is going to take 18 minutes, I think, or you'll read fast, right? And so that, I'm not trying to make light your life difficult, I promise. But there is a challenge there, right? Because you will have to read a little bit faster, I think, than we used to read on the radio. This is, by the way, co-op radio. I was not a professional radio, it's a volunteer situation in Vancouver. And so, yeah, if there's some way that you can, again, sort of think about the topic of, what is each paragraph? What's the nature of the paper? Is it?
It's a music technology.
Oh, okay, right. So not research in the sense of empirical research, but just a discussion of...
yeah, it's more critical.
Right, yeah, okay, yeah. So if you can somehow, distill the essence of each paragraph down to a couple of sentences, and mention those. Yeah, and like I say, elaborate on topic centers and a brief elaboration on it, and then might be. It is hard to generalize, and it's that fallback position of just reading it, where at least you know you're going to say what you want to say, right? But the only question is, are they going to hear what you want them to hear?
Right, yeah,
So
when
that's the
they
difficulty.
told me, well, we just want you to read it, I thought, oh, okay, well, that'll be easy, but then I started thinking about it, and I thought, I don't know how interesting it's going to be. So, you have to work on it.
Yeah, you could even practice, again, if you had get a couple of friends over and say, okay, well, who don't know, haven't read it, read it to them, and find out. And people read in good ways and bad ways, so you might have a very expressive way of reading that gets the point across, and you can time it that way as well to see if you're going to get into a sort of a rush. But I've had, I've been to conferences too many times where, a small panel, like a small room like this, you might only be 12 people in the room, so it's kind of ideal audience situation for mutual exchange and understanding. 3 people read their papers, questions. No one's got any questions because they can't remember what. They might remember a bit of the last paper that was read, they can't remember what it was about. And it's not like they're really dumb or stupid. It's just a feature of that situation. On the other hand, if you do read it, you get it done. It's through. You go home, you say, I participated, I made my presentation at the conference. And that's something to be proud of, no question. So, but if I were just sort of practice, try it with some people, and then if they say, I didn't quite get that, okay, then you find yourself explaining it, and then note how you're doing your explanation.
Okay.
It might possibly be in a more conversational tone, for example, and then think about whether, I'm not trying to push you one way or the other, think about whether you could construct the whole presentation in that tone. Might work,
Nice.
Yeah. What about others? Is there anyone presenting empirical research, like psychology or such? What subjects are you all doing this time?
Yeah, we're doing kind of like empirical research like that. We're doing our topic is triathletes' perceptions on discography.
Oh, okay.
So it's survey research that we're going to go out and do.
Right.
We have a poster that we're creating, and I guess we'll be presenting the oral at a conference.
Great.
So we're just, sorry. I don't really know too much about the oral presentation.
Well, it's preliminary because we haven't done the research yet. It's proposed.
Right, okay.
So we're probably going to include some questions that we will be asking in the study.
Right.
And
so okay, so you're not presenting the results of the study, just the setup, the proposal for it, right? Yeah, okay. And there'll be 2 of you presenting. Have you thought about how to handle that? It's nice to have 2 people sometimes, right?
Yeah. I just off the top of my head, maybe just switch section.
You do a bit, then you do a break. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I haven't really presented too much with more than one person. And usually it's just, okay, well, I'll do this part and you do that part.
Yeah.
But you have to have the same style almost, I find.
Or, compatible style.
You can't have someone
being
walking around, then the next person.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of where we're at.
Right. I'm sure you've come to some great, some successful conclusion about it. Yeah. It would be an opportunity to try out that asking each other questions thing. Maybe. Thing to consider, maybe just as a. So one who asks the other. You could divide it into things like that, as you say, into segments. But in one segment, one person could be asking the other what, cueing the person to give the information. You know what I mean? Then you would know what the answers to each other's questions are, obviously, and then it could be more natural in a way than presenting from written notes or something like that. You know, with all of these things, I'm just throwing out ideas that you would pick and choose what works for you, right? And there's no right answers or perfect way to do it. But you can always experiment again. You get a couple of friends. Does it seem too silly and too hokey, too sort of folksy to do it this way? Maybe so. In some, in some academic conferences, there is kind of a professional demeanour that is expected, and reading seems to be part of that. There's no question. What I'm trying to provoke is some change from that, I suppose. But also, yes, you can just experiment and see what feels right, and that's what to do. How about you? What do you do?
For the past 8 months, I've been working on my FISH 491 undergraduate research project. So,
right.
I've been looking at different assemblages of native and non-native clam species in
Right.
Green Sound and how they alter the sediment. So we've been monitoring for the past 8 months, and I just handed in my first draft of my research paper on Monday. So.
Did you come to any particular conclusion?
The results were not exactly what I expected, but we did get some results. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to share some of those results?
Yeah, basically I hypothesized that the shellfish aquaculture lease treatment that we had would increase in organic matter and silt content as well. So, and I found out that the invasive treatment, the lease treatment, and the control, they all increased in organic matter and silt content. So,
okay.
yeah, there's just, I have so much data, and it's really hard to put it all into like a 15-minute presentation at the Create event, so.
Right, yeah. But hopefully you'll be able to do it, yeah.
Yeah, have nice pictures of it.
Pictures are good.
Yeah.
You mentioned that use of PowerPoint with like just pictures and things, that can be very effective too. Again, you don't have to comment. Adding something to the informational content ultimately of your presentation. But and they just illustrate perhaps what you're saying. Or you may be referring to graphs or tables or summaries.
Yeah, but as well as like just where I work, it was quite beautiful, the mountains in the background. So
yes. All right.
hopefully the
Nice.
audience can kind of look at that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
So if we were to take the results of your research, what would be applied to? Like, what would it make a difference in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think it's definitely useful to the shellfish aquaculture owners to just see how the high densities of manila clams will alter the sediment, just as agriculture on land alters the sediment, I think.
Okay.
It'll be useful for that.
Right. So I'm partly doing the Quirks and Quarks interview here.
Yeah.
And I go on to ask you, tell us about manila clams. What's special about those? Are they native? Are they invasive?
Yeah.
And so on. I might ask you for some of those terms that I don't understand that you mentioned, because I'm not a specialist in that area. So I might ask you to explain some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's definitely something I have to kind of think about the general public and how I'm going to, put it in kind of simpler terms.
But
just
again,
like explaining briefly about it.
You can always invite. Another way with those things is you can invite your audience at the beginning to ask questions. To ask questions of if they don't understand terminology, for example. If you're not used to presenting, it can often be a good idea to ask people to save the questions till the end. But if you feel really confident, you can invite them to interrupt, not to take it off in a whole other direction, but just if there's something you don't, if I use a word that you don't understand, please just stop me and I'll explain what that is. If you're confident and you don't want to get derailed by that process, but it can be helpful. Yeah, great. How about the other two folks? Yeah. to
I have 2 presentations to give coming up.
Oof.
So one is kind of boring on just like the legalities of dam safety, so that'll be
Okay.
interesting to try and make it interesting, I suppose. And
Cartoons.
then-
Cartoons.
And then the other one is research I've been doing all year just on sustainability at the university level in the institution, and
Okay.
doing a comparison of Royal Roads, UNBC, and VIU in their approaches to sustainability and kind of the initiatives that they've been taking so far.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So those initiatives, like in terms of the way facilities is.
Energy, we have 7 categories
Control,
that
yes,
we're
okay.
looking at. Yeah. So that was one of my questions. Actually, you said, you know, when you're posting things on the slides, we don't just want to read from them.
Yeah.
So, like, if I post my 7 categories, is it worth me still saying, oh, and these are my 7 categories, and say them out loud, kind of thing, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It,
And then
you're-
you're
it
elaborating
depends.
verbally.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying what's on the slide, as long as you're not merely, you know, looking at it and ignoring the audience and just reading what it says and nothing else. But certainly, so you tend to put more like the names of the categories. Here are my 7 categories. Will you talk equally about all 7 of them?
No.
Probably not. You might choose one, you know.
Yeah,
two
a couple to highlight.
Yeah, exactly. So you let people know what the various categories are, and you say, but you know, in this presentation, I'm just going to concentrate on number 3, number 4, whatever it is, you know, whatever you feel is most helpful or significant, or like you say, important. Yeah. Is sort of what happens in classrooms included in that in any way, like in terms of learning about sustainability?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Education is one of the
Right.
categories. So I'm only about halfway through my research. I'm going to carry it into next year a little bit too, because it's quite challenging, I guess, to go through all the departments and see what's going on. But yeah, education, waste, food, energy,
Carbon?
yeah,
Or
transportation.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, one more. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'll have to memorize them,
You know,
obviously.
yeah. Well, that's interesting, not yet. Yeah. Very important. Yeah. How about you? Can you share?
Yeah, I've been doing working on a project for tourism and travel characteristics of ESL students, how they travel and how they impact the areas where they travel to, or study to. And I did it was a school project, a small class project. So I presented it already in class, and now I've been asked to present those results in a more industry-like. So it's going to go into the educational department, but also to a local travel company that want to know more, and they want to that one of their target markets is that. So I sort of have to switch from the academic, just I feel at least that I have to switch sort of my presentation and make it more that it suits them. So going away from the purely academic.
Yes.
So that's sort of my challenges that I'm sort of working with, because you don't want to it's not that important to go into the processes of how you get there. It's more results based, a lot more what they expect. So that's what I'm working on.
Right.
Getting that.
Interesting. That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
As one who's travelled with ESL students from here, on field schools to Italy, for example, and so yeah, that'd be interesting to talk to you about that. I'm sure I could learn a lot. Yeah. Several of you mentioned or displayed, let's say, and this is important, a sense of knowing the audience, being and adjusting things for the particular audience that you're doing. I think that's really important. Several of you sort of brought that up, and we were just speaking now, and that's really good. I'm so what's the word? Gratified to that. And I hope you realise what spectacular, first of all, opportunities are being extended to you, and that you've been able to have a chance to present stuff. People, it's almost it's a new thing that the graduates presenting at conferences, or even internally within this university. Has been doing it for a while, but it's something that's kind of special about VIU promoting this. And so, first of all, it's an opportunity, but also I'm really pleased and kind of not proud exactly because it's your work, not mine, but really, really happy that you're grasping these opportunities and doing so well in your work. Yeah, good stuff. Okay. So that for me, that last part was actually talking to you was more enjoyable than what I did at the beginning. Is that not only right at the very beginning, but even my whole presentation? So that's a lesson too, perhaps, for all of us in a way as well. I learned a lot more from seeing you, hearing what you were thinking about how you would do your presentation and that kind of thing. That's kind of fascinating. Great. Okay, I'm done. Are you all done?
I do have one more question.
Yeah.
Because I'm German, so I just moved here, so things are a little different here, and we have like a rule of thumb in Germany that if for three, like you have one slide and it's going to take you approximately 3 minutes to sort of cover that. And I've listened to a lot of presentations here, and they have a lot more on their PowerPoint slides. Like, I'm not sure if that's just like, I don't know, in Germany it's just like you really only put bullet points on.
Yes.
And yeah, if you have 30 minutes, it's 10 slides maximum. So is there something, is that sort of similar, or is it just that?
I don't know of any hard and fast rule about that, but I think the principle is a good one.
Yeah, sort of.
Even when I was going through some of those don'ts at the beginning, it struck me that it's too fast. It struck me at this moment that it was a little bit fast. And however, I was pointing out things that I think I was hoping people would already have had in their minds. This guy is, he's talking too fast. But no hard and fast rule. You just have to. Again, that sounds like a reasonable number. Yeah, 3 minutes a slide.
It always depends.
Yeah, it does depend.
Sort of like,
and I get to learn about this because I get one of my jobs as a dean is to evaluate faculty members on the basis of student questionnaires. So typically new faculty members. So it's something I end up talking to the people about when the students are all saying there's too much stuff on the PowerPoint slides. Because what they're trying to do is write it down as take notes, and that's so they find they just can't get there. But also maybe they're just not taking in. So again, there's only a certain rate at which an audience can absorb with understanding information that you're throwing at them. That applies to speaking, but also to PowerPoints too. So again, it's use the PowerPoint then, as you say, the keywords or key phrases. It's like the headlines, and then you speak. Underneath that headline, you give a bit of information or explanation.
Speak to that, I did a 491 class, and our instructor emphasized and would take marks off if we had a 3x5 rule. So 3 points, each point could be 5 words.
Okay.
And so you really had to cut down and choose your words carefully. I mean, you know the full sentence or whatever behind it, but that makes it really easy to read. You have like image or something.
And then what you can say can be more elaborate, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So you don't really have to say that. People can read that sentence.
That's right.
And understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then you supply the detail or the elaboration. Yeah, that makes good sense. Yeah, so the slides are the ones I prepared for this. The ones I enjoy were the ones that just have a question on or a title. I think those are probably more effective. They're the ones that have the lists. There's just too much in that list. But again, that was part of demonstration of how not to use PowerPoints.
But if you bring them in, like you didn't just have the list, it was like one at a time.
Yes, right, okay, you can think of each one at a time, that's right, yeah.
So it's not like it's a whole.
Yeah. If you have more time to produce it, you can also make those, there's a technique, one of them, you introduce one, and then it fades when you introduce the next one.
Yeah.
It's still there, but it fades to grey or whatever. You know, I did that. So I didn't bother doing that.
I have a question. How about using the PowerPoint to relay more information that you have that you want to speak about, or you're not able to speak about all the information, so using the PowerPoint to give more details about that subject?
I wouldn't recommend that, but maybe in some context that would be possible, but I tend to find that, well, I don't know, this is a good question. Like, some people are very visual. I don't think of myself as a visual learner, let's say. So I don't think I can extract a lot of detail from a slide, say, where there's a graph. Well, graphs can give you an impression. You know, enrollment is going up or going down, whatever it's doing. But I don't, for me, it communicates general impressions rather than much detail. How do other people find that? I mean, there will be differences, I think.
Having an image like a graph or something has all of it right there, all the paragraphs of information on that one graph.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay.
But like, I wouldn't want like a big detailed thing, or like a reference.
Well, perhaps you don't have enough time to explain everything about your research and about the graph. So while you're talking about your research, you're also portraying the graph in the background as well. But you're not able to. You just have so much detail that, and you want to get it all out in one presentation.
Right.
You're restricted to time. So using the PowerPoint as a tool to relay more information, is that bad or good?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
This is something else you have to do.
From people's perception, I guess, is it too much information for them? Because it's...
I think if the audience is having to read more, like while you're talking, they're not going to be paying attention to you. So if it's something that they're reading and they're like, oh, okay, like they're trying to get the information off the slide, they're kind of, which one do I do, read the slide or listen to you?
Yeah.
So that can be good for you. Like I've been in one where they have it all there, the person could just stand off.
Just let
no pressure at all, and your slideshow is so intriguing. Like, you just can speak, they'll hear your voice, but they're really just focusing on that, and then you don't have to really worry about everyone looking at you.
One of us pre-filmed your whole presentation.
That's right, you're on video, we can show it. There is that, I don't know the answer, because, you know, it is said that we're now living in the world of multitaskers. But for me, it does sound like too much multitasking to be extracting information, reading, and also trying to listen. And should we put a musical background on as well, or some musical context happening at the same time? I don't know if we could be done. But the way people ingest or take in information is changing, and I may just be a bit old-fashioned. I guess that would, I would find it a bit distracting myself. But but still, there can be a certain amount of like graphs, like say a bar graph or anything, a line graph, whatever, can be a very succinct way of encapsulating information. It's true, and you don't always have to go through it, So I've been scaring my faculty recently with. They're producing reports on grade distributions, how many A pluses, how many Bs, how many whatever, are being assigned across the university. And so one of the reports I get is a color bar graph of A pluses, A's, A minuses, B pluses, how many you get. And it's very effective just to present that in front of you. You can see very easily, you get a very quick picture of what that distribution is like, how it's changing.
I think on that note too, one thing I just thought of, like if you had your topic and you had like 5 headings or something, and you were only going to talk about 2, then you could have like the other things that you wish you could talk about kind of in the headings at least, and maybe a brief description of them so that people can just read like a sentence or 2. Like this and this too, but you don't have time to talk about it.
And that's applied to your 7 categories,
Yeah.
of which you don't even have to read them all. You can simply say, here are my 7 categories. Leave
And
it,
there could be like
leave
a
it there
little
long enough for people
sentence
to
about
read
it.
it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, here are my 7 categories, and we're looking at a global picture of how the university is dealing with sustainability, and I'm going to focus on these ones. Right? Yeah. That will do that. So that is what following Catherine's. Yeah, that works exactly what we're looking about. Extra detail. Interesting.
I have another question. So with PowerPoints, often we use the PowerPoint to drive our presentation.
Yes.
It's structuring our presentation. Do you know if that's good? Or I've heard that, yeah, I don't know, but I've heard that that PowerPoint presentations aren't looked upon as useful as they were in the past. But,
there's kind of PowerPoint fatigue, right?
Right, yeah.
But it's mostly, I think, around relatively clumsy, well, shouldn't be too judgmental, but some relatively straightforward ways of using it, in which the worst possible thing is just putting stuff up and reading it. And then you think, well, why did the person come to actually listen to you, or to watch a screen? And when you're just, if your whole job is just reporting what the screen says, and you're being led by the screen, then why not just, step back, let the screen do its work. So I always think it's a tool that you're using in aid of your getting your point across. And that, maybe that in my title is that notion that really presentation should have a single point. Here's what I'm trying to get across, and then everything else is just subsidiary to getting that point across.
I think it would largely depend on what the talk is about too.
Yeah.
Instead of PowerPoints are good or bad.
Yeah.
Better in some scenarios than others, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the quality of it as well.
Right. Yeah. They're tools. They're help. They're assists. I think there was assists really well. So. I was talking about using flashcards as your guide to remind yourself of the various stages you're going to go through in the presentation. You could use the PowerPoint functions in that way as well. It's your reminder. But it's always good to know what's on the next screen ahead of time before you actually move to the screen. It's not always possible. People who don't prepare carefully, like myself, don't necessarily know what's on the next screen. So you wait till the screen appears. Oh yeah, then talk about it. So, I already mentioned this. But it's really helpful if you can have an independent way, I think, of knowing what's coming next. Like if ideally just have it in your brain, not always possible.
Instead of PowerPoint, this is a new one. It's online. Has anyone heard of it?
Prezi.
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 And it's because PowerPoints, they're very just basic, but this it will show you the information and then it will visually slide to another way. So it's a lot more visual. And when someone does it good, it works amazing.
But it's hard to get there.
I
think a lot of people are still sort of learning it.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot that they just distract, because you can do lots of fancy stuff with it, really. And as you said, if it's well done, it is a really good tool, but because they have a lot of movement and things like that, if you don't do it, it's sort of like you're watching sort of a movie, and especially if you have too much information or if you talk too fast through the thing, it sort of completely takes away from your presentation. But it's I think it's going to get there, and people, once they sort of worked with it a little bit more, and I heard a couple of people have worked with it, and it says it takes quite some time to get used to everything, and it's going to take you forever for the first one, and then they just it's sort of a practice curve that will kick in. But,
Isn't Prezi like an online application? Or So then you're dependent on.
You can download it and put it on a stick, but
I've seen some presentations get kiboshed because
Yeah.
there's no
activity.
It's like, I don't have anything to show you. But he can download it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That solves that then.
I was just triggered, one more little reminder came to me just a moment ago, which is that don't ever be frightened to say you don't know in making a presentation. Because I said it about something, I don't know. You do want to be seen as somewhat an expert about the particular material that you're presenting. Obviously, it's your material, it's your stuff, it's your work that you've created. And actually nobody knows more about that work than you do, which is good. But if there are side questions, you don't have to, about how this relates to something else, that you don't have necessarily, you're not expected to know everything. And so it's quite possible to say, that's really interesting, I don't know the answer, I can look it up, whatever, or we could think about it, we could talk about that. What do you think about that? It's again fairly common in a sort of conference presentation format, especially the sort of more traditional academic kind, for one of the questions to be so the format of the question doesn't come out like this, but the real form of the question is, well, this is all very interesting, but what does it have to do with what I've been working on for this other person, the questioner, for the last 40 years or something? So, in other words, people can get very self-obsessed and they don't see value in anything that doesn't relate to what they do themselves. In that kind of case, you simply have to say, well, actually, my work doesn't relate to what you've been working on for 40 years, and I'm here to talk about what I can contribute. So, anyway. There are cookies, there's coffee and juice and everything else in the corner. I think they're for us, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There you go. So, make free with them, yeah. Thank you very much for taking the conversation.